Let me begin not at the beginning, for that is lost to the haze of time, like the first breath drawn in a dust storm, but at the moment the silence first became unbearable. It wasn't the silence of the desert night, that vast star-strewn cathedral humming with the secrets of scorpions and shifting dunes. No, this was the silence within the crowded tent, the silence that fell like a heavy wool cloak when my mother's eyes, wide with a grief too deep for a child's comprehension, would slide away from mine. Orphan. The word wasn't spoken often, but it hung in the air, thicker than the scent of roasting lamb, a constant, invisible companion. I was a pebble displaced from the mosaic of kinship, rattling loose in the vastness, belonging nowhere, acutely aware of the empty spaces where parents should have anchored me. The world felt immense, indifferent, a landscape sculpted by winds I could neither see nor understand, and I, a solitary sapling bent by forces beyond my strength. My refuge became the vastness itself. Tending flocks under that immense, merciless sky, I learned the language of solitude, the bleating of goats, the sigh of the wind through dry grasses, the patient turning of the stars. These were my companions. In that austere company, a profound intimacy with emptiness bloomed. I felt the desert's breath on my skin, not as hostility, but as a stark, honest presence. It taught me the fragility of life, the transience of the green shoot pushing through cracked earth, the sudden, silent vanishing of a gazelle on the horizon. Death wasn't an abstract horror. It was the bleached bone half buried in sand, the vulture's patient circle, the inevitable conclusion written in the parched throat of the land. This intimacy with endings birthed a restless yearning. If life was this fleeting spark, what was the fuel? What fire cast the long shadow of existence? The bustling caravans of the city of sand, where I later learned the sharp arithmetic of trade, seemed frantic dances atop a crumbling cliff. Men bartered, boasted, feuded over trinkets and grazing rights, their eyes fixed firmly on the shifting dunes of worldly gain, blind to the abyss beneath their feet. Their laughter often rang hollow in my ears, a desperate percussion against the encompassing quiet. The harbor, not a place of water, but a person, the widow whose eyes held the deep, still waters of understanding. In her presence, the rattling pebble found a temporary resting place. She offered not just shelter, but a recognition of the silent storm within me. Her acceptance was a balm, a proof against the harshness. Yet, even within that sanctuary, the questions persisted, louder now, fueled by the contrast. How could such profound connection exist amidst such pervasive fragmentation? How could the city of sand, teeming with life, feel so spiritually desolate? The idols crowding the ancient sanctuary, stones warmed by desperate hands yet cold to the touch of genuine need, became symbols of a deeper bankruptcy. They were reflections of our own fractured longings, carved and worshipped, yet powerless to mend the tear in the world's fabric or in the human soul. My own heart became that sanctuary, cluttered, yearning, echoing with unanswered pleas. The cave, not merely a hollow in the mountain, but the cavern of my own amplified solitude. The silence there wasn't empty, it was pregnant. It pressed in, thick and demanding. I sought clarity, a single thread in the tangled skein of existence. Instead, I was shattered. The revelation wasn't a gentle whisper, it was the mountain itself cracking open, a searing light that wasn't seen but felt, vibrating in the marrow of my bones, a voice that wasn't sound, but pure, terrifying presence that filled the cave and spilled out, threatening to dissolve me entirely. Recite. The command tore through me, not as words, but as a fundamental rearrangement of reality. In that cataclysm, the greatest terror wasn't annihilation, but the horrifying, exhilarating realization. I was known, utterly, completely, down to the trembling root of my orphaned soul. The loneliness I had carried like a birthmark was pierced. The divine was not a distant star, but the very ground of being, closer than my jugular vein, intimate as breath. The fear was paralyzing, a physical weight pinning me to the cold stone. Had the mountain's heart finally devoured me? Had the silence driven me mad? I crawled home, a vessel cracked and overflowing, seeking the harbor, whispering through chattering teeth, "Cover me, shroud me." It wasn't the cold, it was the unbearable intensity of being seen, truly seen, for the first time. The years that followed were a relentless forging. The message, a molten truth poured into the fragile vessel of human language, was a burden both glorious and crushing. To speak of the One, the merciful, the compassionate, in a world deafened by the clatter of idols and ambition, was to paint with light in a sandstorm. The ridicule was a desert wind, scouring and constant. The rejection, a familiar ache, the orphan's wound reopened. Poet? Possessed? The labels stung, not for the insult, but for the profound misunderstanding. They saw delirium where I felt terrifying clarity. They heard madness in the echoes of the cave. The harbor, my steadfast widow, was the first anchor, her belief a lifeline thrown into the maelstrom. Others followed, drawn not by my eloquence, but by the unsettling resonance of the truth I carried, a truth that vibrated in their own hidden silences. Building this nascent community, this fragile shelter of shared belief amidst the howling gale of disbelief, was like weaving a tent from spider silk. Every connection felt miraculous, every defection a personal failure that echoed the old abandonment. The weight of responsibility was a mountain strapped to my back. Had I truly understood the magnitude when the cave cracked open? The loneliness transformed, but never vanished. It became the solitude of the shepherd leading his flock through a perilous pass, responsible for every stumble, every loss. The night journey. Ah, how to speak of the unspeakable. It wasn't travel, but unfolding. One moment, the familiar confines of the resting place. The next, the boundaries of self and space, dissolving like salt in water. It was an ascension not through air, but through veils of perception, a journey into the heart of the divine radiance. Words are clumsy tools for such an experience. Imagine standing at the very source of the river of existence, feeling its boundless current flow through you, not past you. To witness the tapestry of creation from its luminous origin to its furthest fading echo, and to know with a certainty that bypassed thought, that every thread, every joy, every tear was held, known, and infinitely precious within that encompassing embrace. Returning was like being poured back into an earthen cup after tasting the ocean. The mundane world seemed dimmer, yet charged with a hidden significance. The loneliness acquired a new dimension, the aching gap between that ineffable intimacy and the daily struggle to translate its echo into guidance for thirsty souls. Exile. The wrenching farewell to the city of sand, the place of my birth, my losses, my shattered childhood, and the terrifying birth of my mission. Leaving its familiar, sun-baked alleys felt like tearing roots from parched earth. The journey through the furnace blast of the desert to the oasis of refuge was more than a physical trial. It was a descent into the crucible of trust. Stripped of status, security, everything familiar, we were raw need walking under a pitiless sun. The thirst was a demon gnawing at our throats, the fear a constant companion. Yet, in that utter vulnerability, the harbor within, the unwavering faith forged in the cave and tempered by years of struggle, held firm. The oasis wasn't just water and date palms. It was the manifestation of that trust, a fragile new beginning watered by tears and desperation. Here, the community became a body, each member an organ, each loss a shared wound. The conflicts, the betrayals from within, they cut deeper than the swords of open enemies. Was this fractured unity the best we could manage? The loneliness now was the leader's solitude, bearing the hopes and failures of a people striving towards an ideal that seemed to shimmer and recede like a desert mirage. The return, years later, was not a triumph of conquest, but a weary homecoming, a closing of a bitter circle. The idols were toppled, yes, stones falling with a hollow clatter that echoed strangely in the suddenly quiet sanctuary. But the greater victory felt internal, quieter. It was the fragile possibility of Tawheed, not just the oneness of God, but the yearning for the oneness of the human heart, aligned with that divine source. Seeing the faces of those who had once cast stones, now softened by hesitant awe, brought not exultation, but a profound, humbling exhaustion. The harbor was long gone, her absence a permanent ache in the landscape of my heart. New shelters were built, alliances forged, responsibilities multiplied, a complex latticework of care for the vulnerable, the displaced, the seekers drawn to the oasis's light. These choices, often scrutinized through the harsh lens of later ages, arose not from grand strategy, but from the relentless, sometimes overwhelming, pressure of Rama. That boundless, divine mercy that had first shattered me in the cave, now demanding expression through my own painfully limited human capacity. It was building dikes against a flood of human need with handfuls of sand. Each decision carried the weight of potential failure, the sting of unintended consequence. The loneliness deepened into the solitude of immense responsibility, the knowledge that ultimate judgment rested not with men, but with the one who knew the tremor in my hands as I signed a treaty, the doubt in my heart as I sought guidance. And then the final descent. The fever wasn't just heat, it was the slow dissolution of the vessel. The world receded, sounds muffled as if heard through layers of wool. The faces of loved ones, the companions who had become limbs of this striving body, swam in and out of focus. The pain was a desert consuming me grain by grain. Yet, within this consuming fire, a profound clarity emerged, sharper than any revelation in the cave. The struggles, the revelations, the love, the loss, the crushing weight, the fleeting moments of connection that felt like touching the hem of the divine. They weren't separate threads, but the intricate, inseparable pattern of a single life lived in the terrifying, glorious shadow of the infinite. The orphan's ache, the shepherd's solitude, the merchant's disillusion, the prophet's burden. the leader's weariness. They were all facets of the same relentless seeking, the same impossible yearning to bridge the chasm between the human and the divine, to make the unseen seen, the unheard heard. In the gathering darkness, the silence returned, not as an absence, but as a presence, the same vast humming silence that had cradled the shepherd boy under the stars. It wasn't empty now, it was full of the echo of the voice, the warmth of the harbor's hand, the scent of the desert after rain, the weight of a child's trust, the sharp tang of betrayal, the crushing responsibility, the unbearable beauty of a single, faithful heart. I had been a conduit, flawed and trembling, for a mercy that demanded everything. The final breath wasn't an end, but a release, a dissolving back into the immense silence that had always held me, the orphan, the seeker, the servant. Not into nothingness, but into the source of the yearning itself. So let this be my testament, whispered on the wind that stirs the desert sands. I was not a monument, but a man, a vessel cracked by loneliness, filled, sometimes overflowing, sometimes near empty, by a light not my own. I walked the knife edge between terror and awe, between the crushing weight of the seen world and the unbearable proximity of the unseen. My life was not a path to power, but a desperate, stumbling return, an orphan forever seeking the embrace that transcends all earthly kin. If my journey speaks to you, let it remind you, the deepest solitude is the birthplace of connection. The most shattering revelation begins with a command whispered to a trembling heart, and the only legacy that endures is written not in stone or conquest, but in the invisible ink of mercy offered, one aching soul to another, beneath the vast, silent, watching sky. I was Muhammad. I am the echo of the question that lives in every human heart. Is there more? And the answer, found in the beautiful act of surrender, is always, eternally, yes.